This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Recently, I received this absolutely massive package in the mail, full of what is probably an entire city's worth of MDF building kits from the extremely talented Ryan over at Brutal Cities. Today, I'd like to assemble one of these kits, customizing it and painting it to the best of my ability, as well as giving you some tips and tricks that I learned for building and customizing MDF kits along the way. But before we get started, I just want to thank Ryan so much for sending me over this care package. This video is not sponsored by him. I'm just a huge fan of his work, and he seems like a really nice guy, so when he generously offered to send me some kits to build and customize, of course I said yes, and he even surprised me with these custom laser engraved signs for my fake company in fictional city. So thank you so much again, Ryan, for sending me all this stuff. Link down in the description if you want to check out his awesome terrain kits and terrain company. With all that out of the way, let's get started. Since it's been almost a decade now since I've built any MDF kits, I did a lot of research before putting this one together. I learned that MDF tends to soak up paint like a sponge, so it is best to seal them with something first before painting them. Either some spray primer, Mod Podge, or varnish. I chose to do this before assembly as I figured it would be the best way to get the most coverage. So I started by priming these kits with black primer, and when I started to run out of black primer, I switched over to Army Painter Ash Gray primer. While I was at it, I spray primed a few of my Star Wars Shatterpoint terrain pieces in the same color, as I've been putting off painting those for a while now, and I thought these two types of terrain might look good together. After a few coats on each side of the terrain pieces, and after giving everything some time to dry, it was time to assemble our Brutalist masterpiece. This kit went together pretty easily, and I was really impressed at not only how quickly it went together, but how Ryan's design work on this piece works with the grain of the medium rather than against it. What do I mean by this? Well, if you look at these sections where the parts join together, in many places I found it was hard to tell where the joins even are because he puts them in natural places that either look like intentional bits of style and detail, or where you would expect a join to be if this was an actual building made out of concrete. It's hard to totally communicate this feeling without building one of these kits yourself, but the overall feeling of this kit is that it is an architectural model of a real place. A place that I would like to live or hang out instead of just being a piece of background terrain in a sci-fi game. Most of the kits slid together pretty flawlessly and very little glue was needed. I followed the video instructions that Ryan made over on the Brutal Cities YouTube channel, and I put this thing together in maybe an hour or two total. Overall, if you're new to MDF kits, I would highly recommend this one as a good place to start, as it was pretty accessible and easy to put together. And with the kit completely built, I thought a little bit about how I wanted to paint this kit. And to start out, I think I want to add some further weathering and texture to the concrete. Ryan recommends you use an oil wash for this, but you know me, I both hate toxic fumes and I also own too many speed paints. So I had an idea to use some of the original Speed Paint 1.0 formula to do some oil wash style shading on the concrete areas. So I busted out my old set of 1.0 speed paints and mixed together a wash of about 1/3 dark wood, 1/3 speed paint medium, and 1/3 water. I then slathered this mixture on top of the concrete on one side of the building, waited a minute, and then tried to remove the paint with a makeup sponge. And to my delight, it almost all came off, just leaving the surface a little bit dirty and weathered looking. After this, I experimented further, leaving the speed paint on for a few minutes longer before sponging it off, and I got even more extreme results. I also experimented with mixtures with less water, and that brought more intense results as well. As I did this, I was continually referencing real-life images of concrete buildings, both far away shots as well as close-up shots of the concrete to make sure I was getting a look that was relatively close to reality. And one thing I learned pretty quickly with this technique is that you want to keep your brushstrokes as vertical as possible so that any excess just looks like weathering that has dripped down over decades of wear and tear. Another thing to keep in mind is that even after an hour or two of drying, you can still use a damp brush or a makeup sponge to reactivate the paint and move it around on the surface. And you can get some really cool effects by doing this. One of my favorite techniques that I found was to lay down a heavy coat of this mixture, wait 10 or so minutes for it to dry, and then I just went in with a damp brush and nudged the paint around on the surface. Not removing the excess, but instead pushing it towards the crevices between the concrete slabs to create deeper shadows. As I was doing this, I also decided to add my first piece of customization to the kit in the form of tiled stairs, using some evergreen tiled polystyrene sheets that I had lying around from previous projects. Once again, I found myself not wanting to alter the fundamental architecture of this kit too much, as part of its charm is its imposing simplicity. How simple its shapes are, how calm and serene it can make you feel. Much like this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website and hosting platform that I have been using for the past decade now for all of my website needs. And much like Brutal Cities terrain kits, Squarespace has a number of simple, elegant, and functional templates that you can pick from as a starting point, which look great on their own. Or if you'd like something a little bit more custom, you can add in any extra pages or widgets that you might like onto your website using their extremely intuitive drag and drop grid system. No coding or technical knowledge required. I've been using my current Squarespace website to house a gallery of my painted miniatures, all of my painting reference documents, as well as an online store where I can sell anything I might like. So if you need a website, why not check out squarespace.com today for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Dana Howl for 10% off your very first purchase of a website or domain. And with the basic structure and paint job complete, it was time to move on to the fun part, more details. The first thing I knew I really wanted to add to this kit was some LED lighting, and while traditionally I might leave this until the end, I really couldn't resist and I just wanted to add it right now. So I purchased some cheap LED kits from Amazon and hot glued one underneath the removable ceiling of the top floor. Did I mention this kit has a removable ceiling so you can look into the top floor and put your models in there? It's pretty cool. And I glued a second LED kit to the recesses above both the entrances and the staircase. Once this was done, I found it really gave the piece some instant atmosphere, and I'm really glad I took the time to add the LEDs to this piece at this point instead of waiting till later. If you're curious, the reason I used hot glue for this instead of something more permanent is that I thought it would be easy to remove or replace the LEDs in the future if they burn out or if I need to replace the battery. With the LEDs in place, I then turned my attention to some of the extra bits and details that come with this kit. For some of the parts with engraved details, I used my hobby knife to carve out and emphasize this detail. And for parts that were supposed to represent pipes and wiring, I carved them down a bit to give them a more rounded look. I glued these onto the building in mostly the recommended places using PVA glue, and I think these really help to give the building some more realism and detail. As always, if you are doing any carving or sanding with MDF, make sure to wear a respirator so you don't breathe in this dust. It's quite bad for your lungs from what I understand. And with all of these details in place, I decided to add just a little bit more tiling along some of the exterior walls, just to add a little bit more personalization and detail. And after this, I added some strips of balsa wood to frame the front door, and the tiles in that area just because I thought the tiles looked a little bit lonely by themselves and could use some more trim to help accent it. After this, I primed all of these new details that I just added in black using a 50-50 mix of Mod Podge and black paint. And once this was done, I thought the building could use a little bit more detail, so using some floral wire, I added some cabling along various edges and crevices where I thought it would look cool, or just where I would expect wiring to be. Finally, I painted the doors using a few coats of Viejo model color Salmon Rose. I painted the tiles using Speed Paint 2.0 Pastel Seafoam, and I painted the balsa wood trim using Pro Acryl Ivory. With all of the base colors complete, it was time to add some printed details to help give this whole piece a sense of scale, realism, and history. I wanted this building to feel right at home in any modern day, post-apocalyptic, or even sci-fi or cyberpunk city I might want to use it for, so instead of using a real-world language for this, I actually opted to use a fictional one. Specifically, the language from one of my favorite post-apocalyptic video game worlds, Splatoon. And there are actually many reasons why I chose to do this, and I'm going to tell you what all of those reasons are right now. Firstly, I'm a huge fan of Splatoon, and it's been a huge influence on all of my artwork. But also, the Splatoon language isn't actually a real language, but rather it's a collection of different fonts, which are influenced by real-world fonts or languages. So when you look at it from far away, you can kind of imagine it's whatever real-world or sci-fi language you want it to be. But also, probably the main reason I chose Splatoon for all of these printed materials is that there is just so much pre-existing art for the Splatoon world in the form of posters, street art, product labels, and it's all very accessible and easy to find, both in art books and online. So it was really quick and easy to put together this sheet of various stickers, posters, and graffiti that I could then print out and use on this building. Unfortunately, I don't currently own a color printer, so I just used my black and white printer for this. I printed all of these assets out on various different bright colors of paper. And for some of the assets, I even used paint to color it in like a coloring book before cutting these out and pasting them on the building with PVA glue. I pasted these materials on in random patterns that I thought made sense for a building like this, and I used a mixture of different elements that I thought told a story and placed them accordingly. Alternating between what looked like ads for products or events, these cool triangle eye posters that in my head look kind of like propaganda posters or warning posters for something, signs or labels that the owners of the building themselves might have put up, as well as street art and graffiti tags, and I even crumpled a few papers up to place on the ground to look like garbage. I also thought the front door could use a sign, and I reasoned that the bottom floor of this building was some sort of sinister lab, so I used this printout of the Kamabo Corporation's logo, which is a sinister corporation within the Splatoon universe, and I glued this logo onto some plastic card tile to make a sign to put right above the door, and I thought that looked quite nice. Overall, the building was still looking a bit too clean, a little bit too new, when I want this building to really feel old and have a sense of history and age to it. So to help tie everything together, I added more of my brown wash over top of all of the printed elements I just put up, as well as over top of all of the brightly colored doors and tiles, and I feel like this really went a long way towards tying everything together and making it look less like a model and more like a real place. With all of this done, the only real part that stuck out to me as looking like a model kit or looking a little bit too artificial were the doors for some reason. So I added some scratches onto the doors with my hobby knife and some extra weathering, and that seemed to do the trick. Finally, I thought this building could use a little bit of foliage to help ground it more in the real world, so I cut up some grass tufts and I glued these where you might expect weeds or little pieces of grass to be growing up through the cracks between the concrete. And I also added a few of these miniature leaves that I really like. I bought these from Diorama Presepe a while back, and I've been looking for an excuse to use them. I also added on bits of this really fine dirt from an ashtray to really give it that authentic downtown Toronto look. And if you are wondering, all of this is getting glued down with a 50-50 mix of Mod Podge and water. I also added some leaves on the roof, as you might expect, and that's pretty much it. Overall, I think I might have gone a little bit too far in these last few steps, and the extra layers of leaves and grime maybe make this building feel a little bit less aged and more abandoned or post-apocalyptic, but I think I'm okay with that. Oh, and I also started painting up a few of my Star Wars Shatterpoint terrain pieces using this same workflow, these same paints and techniques, and I think these two types of terrain fit really well together. I really like that this building looks modern or post-apocalyptic by itself, but when you add in the Star Wars elements, it suddenly looks like a cyberpunk or sci-fi building, so that's a pretty cool option to have, I think. But what do you think? Do you want to see me build some more of these building kits? Let me know down in the comments. Or if you'd like to build some of these kits yourself, make sure to check out brutalcities.com. Thank you so much, as always, to all of our generous patrons for supporting the channel. It's because of you that I can do more indulgent builds like this every once in a while. And I will see all of you in the next video.